Hi. They say God works in mysterious ways. Sometimes I think God works in very strange ways as well, and ways that we might even think of as foolish. I was reading in John chapter 21 about one of the resurrection appearances that Jesus made when he came and met with his disciples at the Sea of Galilee. They'd gone back fishing, they didn't really know what to do. You get the impression they were at a bit of a loose end, really, but they go out fishing and they spend all night fishing and they catch nothing. And early in the morning, as they are coming in perhaps to land at the beach, there's a figure on the shore and they don't recognize who it is. And the man on the shore says, "Haven't you caught any fish?" And so they answer, "No." He said, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat and you'll find some." And when they did, it says, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. And the man on the shore, of course, is the risen Jesus. The interesting thing about that, well, one of the interesting things about that is what he tells them to do, to throw the net on the right side of the boat. I'm indebted to David Emison for sharing this with me once, and he told me that in first century fishing terms on the Sea of Galilee, nets were always thrown on the left-hand side of the boat, and the reason for that was because of the way that the boats were built, with a tiller on the right-hand side of the boat, which they used to steer the boat with. So they always threw the net on the left side, what we would call the port side, because the right side, the starboard side, the net would foul the tiller and they'd be in trouble. So they always threw the net to the left-hand side of the boat, as we would call it, the port. Jesus says to them, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat, the starboard side of the boat." And well, that's just not what you do. I mean, these men are fishermen. It's how they've earned their living. It's how they've survived over the years. They know exactly how to fish, and throwing the net on the starboard side of the boat is just not the way to do it. And the strange thing is that actually they do what he tells them to. And when they pull the net in, it's full of a large number of fish. It tells us later 153 large fish were in the net. And that's not just a strange thing to do, it's even a foolish thing to do because, well, fishermen just didn't do it that way. And that set me thinking about the foolishness of God. And it took my mind to another passage in the scriptures in 1 Corinthians and chapter 1, where Paul talks about the message of the cross as the foolishness of God. The message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, Paul says, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. And I thought about how with Jesus and the disciples, he'd told them to do something that seemed very foolish, and yet it was exactly the thing to do. And the cross, Paul says, seems foolishness. Foolishness to the Greeks is how he describes it later on. The message of Christ crucified, foolishness to the Greeks and a stumbling block to the Jewish people. Not what you would have expected. In fact, quite the opposite of what you would have expected. Because when you think about it, the Messiah hanging on a cross in shame and disgrace, crucified by the Roman authorities, not what was expected of the Messiah. And yet, it's that experience, that act of God in Jesus dying on the cross, that foolish, strange way to go about things, that is the power of God for salvation, Paul says. And he contrasts the act of Jesus on the cross with his own words, the words of human wisdom in 1 Corinthians 1 and verse 17. He says, "Not with words of human wisdom, lest the cross of Christ be emptied of its power." The message of the cross for Paul takes us to the very heart of the love of God and the power of God for our human lives. And it is a strange thing, isn't it? Because, I mean, the cross looks like it's about rejection. You know, the disciples run away from Jesus. As he hangs on the cross, he prays, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And yet, the cross is not about rejection. It's about reconciliation and the restoration of relationship. It looks like defeat. But actually, it's about victory. It looks like punishment for sin because Jesus dies a criminal's death, and yet it's about forgiveness where Jesus bears the sin of the world and we are able to be forgiven as a result of that. It looks to be about death, and actually it's about life. It looks to be about hatred, human hatred towards Jesus, the Rabbi, the Son of God, and yet it's about love. It looks one thing, and yet it's another. It looks foolish, and yet it's about the power of God for salvation. And when we think about that message of the cross being the power of God for salvation, we're reminded that God's saving power is not made known to us in words of human wisdom, as Paul's talked about in that earlier verse. It's not made real in the words of human wisdom or in the normal human, sensible, ordinary way of doing things. God does things in a mysterious way, a strange way, a foolish way. Takes what seems to us to be nonsense and makes it marvelous. The message of the cross seems to be about weakness, and it's about power. And when we think about the power of God being manifest in people's lives, that just brings me to the realization that if we are to present the good news of God in a way that will really impact people's lives with life-changing power, then we cannot avoid the message of the cross, because that's where the power of the gospel is, in the message of the cross. It seems to me sometimes that so much of what we're doing in churches is about sort of church marketing. You know, we'll do this and hope that people like it. We hope that they'll like our music. We hope that they'll like our helter skelter. We hope that they'll like our coffee or our coffee mornings and our whatever we've got. We hope that they'll like all these things. We market ourselves in very human ways, I think. But it's only when we come to the cross. And sometimes, you know, these things will bring people closer to God, I'm sure. I'm not denying that. But it's at the message of the cross that we truly encounter the life-changing power of God for salvation. And my plea for us as a church, and my encouragement for us as followers of Jesus, is that we don't shy away from pointing people to the cross and to the message of the cross and to the power of God for salvation that's in the cross. By all means, let's draw people in with all kinds of things, but let's not stop short of the message of the cross, which is the power of God for salvation. Other things might be holy, but it's only at the cross that we come to the holiest of holy places and where we encounter the life-changing power of God. God does indeed move in mysterious ways. So as we move on from the events of that first Easter weekend and the death of Jesus on the cross and into the Easter season, when we're thinking about the presence of the risen Jesus with us, let's remember and continue to remember and to proclaim the message of Christ crucified, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And that's how God shows his love to us most supremely. God bless you. Amen.